Welcome to the NIL Era podcast. My name is Elise Byun.
And I'm Fernando Andrade. And obviously, we're very excited to kick off this very first episode of this brand new podcast. And for those that are wondering what this even is, Elise, can you help us out here?
Yeah, allow me to explain. So, Fernando and I are both retired student athletes. We both competed at Cal, did our undergrad degrees there. Fernando's still doing school there, still an academic weapon. I just graduated from the women's gymnastics team. Fernando was a men's soccer student athlete. And during our time at Cal, we just absolutely loved our time as student athletes, but also the student athlete voice and those high level conversations around the business of college sports. And we just feel right now there is a new era upon us, whether that be because of NIL or because of all the litigation cases happening against NCAA. This is a very exciting time in college athletics, and we just want to be a part of it still. So, just a little spiel.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, we did focus a lot on things that go beyond the sport. In the NCAA, we worked a lot with the athletic department, whether that's the student athlete advisory committee. You were the president, I was the vice president at one point. You represented the conference, represented the entire actual conference at the Division 1 level. I filled in at times. Like we know a bit about these things, and I think there's so much going on at the moment, and it's great to just keep learning about it. And I think for anybody listening right now, they obviously can see the title of the podcast. It's called the NIL Era podcast, and it is a new era in the NCAA. But for anybody that just has no clue what's going on here, could you just tell us a bit about NIL, about what it is and where it's going?
Yeah, for sure. I think for anyone involved in the college athletics space, NIL is the topic every single day. So, NIL, or name, image, and likeness, refers to student athletes being able to profit off their own personal brand within college athletics. So, now finally being able to receive compensation for your own NIL. This can take form of jersey sales, autographs, brand deals, and even content creation. So you're seeing student athletes finally being able to receive compensation while they're in the NCAA. And I just believe, and we both believe, that something crazy is happening within college athletics. Athletes are making more than their coaches, revenue share is coming, and you're seeing athletic departments shift to one of a business model. Like any business, you have roles of chief revenue officer, and I think especially with the house settlement and revenue share coming, I won't be surprised if more athletic departments create roles like that within college athletics. And even at Cal, you're seeing the importance of a department or individual who specializes in NIL. Our head of compliance stepped down and was now his new role as director of NIL. And even here at Northwestern, their AD just stepped down and is now their head of NIL. So this role is important because it just shapes the people you recruit and retain in this now business of college athletics. And especially with the House settlement that kind of referenced before, which is hopefully being finalized by early 2025. NIL is here to stay. Collectives are not going away, despite a lot of people kind of thinking that's the way it was going to go. In terms, are they going to merge with athletic departments? Is Title IX playing a role? Who knows? But it's apparent that NIL is a huge factor in recruiting both out of high school and in the transfer portal. So you're just going to see more and more high stake deals.
Let's break this down a bit because that was a lot of great
Okay.
information. And I think essentially what we're talking about here is this didn't exist 3 years ago. So like prior to 3 years ago, student athletes could not make a single cent. Like that
Yep.
that was illegal. They were considered amateurs, and they're still considered amateurs. Technically, this is not pay for play, supposedly, right? That's the idea of NIL. It's that you get paid for your name, image, and likeness, which tends to be more on the marketing side of things. It's not
Yep.
really for your performance, but there are a lot of loopholes there, and we can talk about how that differs by state in a bit. But I think the most important thing here is to understand how involved so many different aspects of the NCAA world are. So there's Congress, like Elise mentioned. there is athletic departments, there are conferences, there's so many different things going on. And I think that's why it's important to have a podcast about it at this very time of two people that have some sort of experience in this world as student athletes that have been in the rooms where these conversations take place at an athletic department level, at a conference level, at a division 1 level, at an NCAA level. I think that's why it's so important to just be able to communicate this message for everyone to understand and just to break it down as well as to keep up with everything that's going on. Obviously, the landscape of college athletics is just all over the place, and I don't know, I figured it's fun for two washed up D1 athletes to not only reflect on their experiences in college athletics and connect it with the current landscape, but to also educate current college athletic junkies and what's happening in the real time. I think the whole idea behind this is really just to maximize the NIL potential for student athletes, for brands looking for deals, for athletic departments, anyone in this space. I think there's just so much untapped potential that we can learn from.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's also important to realize context, both of us being student athletes from a Division 1 school, the number one public university in the world, in the Power 5 level, all of that, but also being Olympic sports. We're not the revenue making sports. I'm a female sport, all of that. So I think we hold a perspective that is very interesting because we also, like you said, we've been in those rooms where it happens. We've had a seat at the table, so we know the business behind what is college athletics, and you need to make money, and that's coming from those revenue making sports. So it's definitely a nuanced conversation that I'm excited that we're going to be able to talk about and share with everyone, because I think in terms of media and coverage and all that, the conversation is not as nuanced as it's supposed to be. So for anyone listening, if you're a current student athlete, and you want to get involved in NIL, you might not be the star athlete on your team. I was not. But your story is important and deserves to be told. And I've been able to do that and reap the benefits of that. It's now just, how do you position yourself? How do you navigate this ever changing landscape? How do you differentiate yourself from the rest? And that also goes for athletic departments and brands as well. Everyone has a stake in NIL.
All right. So with that being said, let's start digging a bit deeper into what NIL even is. Elise mentioned something extremely important right now, which is that we both played on Olympic sports. Elise was a gymnast, I was a soccer player. Traditionally in the NCAA, that those are not revenue teams, that they're not making much money. Traditionally, it's football and basketball. That's just how it works. And we can talk about those business models in future episodes, but for now, there are plenty of headlines, so many going on. We see so many stars making millions of dollars. And I don't necessarily think that's the reality for everyone. But to get started on what NIL is, can you give us some examples, Elise, of what we're seeing in these headlines with some of the biggest names in sports?
Yeah, definitely. So, of course, all these people are great athletes, like, that's no question about it, but it's looking at the Caitlin Clarks, Bronny James, Shador Sanders, of course, Livy Dunn. What do they all have in common? They are some of the highest paid college athletes worth over millions of dollars, and it's crazy to think that 3 years ago, they would have 0 of that capital. And I think it's also important to recognize that most people think NIL is for everyone, but it's not. Like, how many NIL deals do you think the back-to-back National Player of the Year and Purdue superstar Zach Edey has? Not as many as you'd think. So NIL is really only made easy for domestic student athletes, not those who are international. And Edie being from Canada and visa requirements and rules, international student athletes aren't able to participate in NIL when they're on American soil.
Wait, so for that, does that mean that he just isn't making money at all, or how does that work? Are they just at a disadvantage when they're going to school and they could participate in it when they're back home or anywhere else? Like, how does that work?
So it's interesting. So it's right now the conversation, I'm gonna be honest, like, I'm pretty sure you're allowed to still enter your collective and maybe even do like online jersey sales, but in terms of what you usually see as NIL deals of maybe like posting on your Instagram story with you and like a drink or like, like a Celsius, something like that. they can't participate in those types of deals. But funny enough, I had a student athlete friend at Cal who was an international student athlete, so wasn't able to participate in those NIL deals. But during spring break, had the opportunity to go to Cabo with some friends. And as soon as he touched down in Cabo, you see him on Instagram posting all of these things from the collective. So he's getting the bag in a different country. So as long as you are not stepping foot in the US in that sense, it's fair game. So you're seeing student athletes, international student athletes, do a bunch of deals when they're home, when they're abroad, just probably not at school or in the conventional manner.
And this is pretty much just because of their visa situation, right? Like they're not on a working visa and they would be getting paid for this. They're just on a student visa. And that is literally the reason they can't participate in NIL, but they are doing the exact same work as everyone else, which is very interesting. I'm sure we will see changes to that very soon. I mean, I know that's in the works. I know there's plenty of talk about that, but it's crazy how international student athletes cannot make a single cent from NIL when in the United States. That's
Like, there must be a way in terms of, like, those online jersey sales, because technically, like, where are you doing those deals? Like, they can't really tell. Um, so it's interesting the loopholes that are definitely happening for these student athletes, uh, for them to get compensated.
and I think the most important part is that it's only 3 years old. Like it's this is a very new thing and it's why these types of situations come up. To understand this better, where were we 3 years ago? What happened 3 years ago for us to get to where we are today? Obviously so much has changed, but if we look at the basics, what was it that changed on the 1st of July of 2021?
Yeah, so following a Supreme Court ruling concluding that the NCAA violated antitrust laws, NIL was officially passed on July 1st, 2021. So this is following decades of student athlete exploitation by universities, conferences, and the NCAA just profiting off their student athletes' brand, whether it were from merchandise, billboards, video games, and student athletes had enough. It was argued that that the scholarships given by athletic departments and universities compensated student athletes enough for their athletic achievements, but as college sports just continued to become a bigger business, the student athlete brand became a profitable entity that they couldn't even own. And you also saw it even with the Alston Supreme Court ruling of that academic success portion of compensation. So, just pressure from graduated student athlete advocates, the various state legislatures that passed NIL before even the official ruling, like California, and honestly, a reality check of what college athletics has become. It's just made NIL more important than ever.
So, to give some of these examples of how colleges, universities, conferences were profiting off of student athletes, we're talking jersey sales, we're talking the former video games that were
Yep.
around back then. And I think it's important to specify and or emphasize the distinction of which sports are we're talking about here. Again, football and men's basketball are traditionally the revenue sports. I think
Mhm.
now, obviously, women's
Yes.
basketball is very high up there. I think even women's gymnastics is on the rise. Like we see these sports on the come up, but it's nowhere comparable traditionally to what football and basketball is. And even for the NCAA purposes, football and basketball are completely different when it comes to business. So could you explain that a bit to anybody that has no clue what we're talking about here with Olympic sports and revenue making sports?
Yeah, for sure. So everything in college athletics is kind of a trickle down system. So, our revenue making sports at your institutions, your football, men's basketball, women's basketball, are usually the ones helping fund the rest of the athletic department. Similarly, at the conference level, those media rights deals usually have football, men's basketball, women's basketball in a different like package from the rest of your Olympic sports. Uh, Something that's interesting that most people don't realize until you kind of know it is the NCAA does not make any money off of college football. If you think about college football, it's college football playoff, the CFP. Even when you're choosing those, when it's playoff season, the decision is a CFP selection committee. It's not people in a room choosing who goes and plays. And even if you think of those CFP national championship games, there is zero NCAA branding on the field.
Even the
So
trophy is different.
even the trophy is different. So the NCAA does not make any money off of college football. They make money off of men's basketball and now women's basketball. But even this year, women's basketball, I'm almost positive, was grouped with the rest of the Olympic sports in terms of media rights deals. So men's basketball, you see March Madness on a ton of different channels, all that. Women's basketball was only on ESPN, like the rest of the Olympic sports during championship season. So now they just renewed their media rights and grouped women's basketball differently, more coverage and all of that. So it's interesting how the business landscape of the media rights, it has so much to do with the your brand, again, NIL, of your conference, of your athletic department, all of that. So it's an interesting model to say the least.
And the reason why this matters is because let's take a look at, I don't know, a school like Cal, because we both went there, right? We're talking about pretty much 30 teams. And
Yeah.
those 30 teams depend on two teams. And the players on those two teams, it's pretty much a full-time job on top of academics. Prior to 3 years ago, they could not make a single cent. Of course, they were on scholarship and had plenty of benefits, no doubt about that. But they are also working full time. And in our case, there's 900 student athletes, and pretty much 800 of us depend on them. So
Mhm.
that's why it's fascinating, and it's important to understand that athletic departments depend on their football teams, but the NCAA depends on men's basketball pretty much traditionally. Now women's basketball is also up there, but we're talking about $1 billion business happening in March. And
Yeah.
that's what holds us up the other 11 months of the year. Like, if it's not for March Madness and the NCAA does not exist, the
Yeah.
entire $1 billion business is made up in 1 month of the year,
Yeah.
which is incredible to even understand.
It's those media rights deal. Like that's why you're seeing these media companies trying to penetrate different markets. You saw it when UCLA and USC decided to leave the Pac-12. And they announced it like what, 2, 3 years ago now? It was a long time coming of the Big 10. They were like, we need the LA market. So they poached UCLA and USC, and it was a deal they could not refuse. Like it was so much money that you're seeing like it's a business at the end of the day, and it's hard because also, like, Olympics are happening. Paris is it's, like, in a month, the Olympics, and college athletics births Olympic hopefuls and Olympic dreams. The men's gymnastics team was just announced, and the 5 guys on that team all went through college athletics. They all went through the NCAA program. They all did so well. They got their development from their collegiate coaches and just made the Olympic team. So it's hard to see it as a business and all this stuff when it was created to be that student before athlete model and to get a great education while competing at the top of your sport. So it's hard to see all this change while also trying to preserve what was the foundation of college athletics. It's interesting. We're in an interesting time.
And what's important for student athletes listening to understand is that this entire business model is what allows us to compete in the first place. So, Elise just mentioned the entire Pac 12 media rights situation, which pretty much killed the Pac 12. Like, now it's over because of those media rights deals. What's important to understand is that if the Pac 12 would have been a country at the Tokyo 2021 Olympics, it would have been fifth on the medal count list. That's the type of thing we're talking about. So, all of these media rights deals, all of this money coming from college football and college basketball is a great source, not only for college athletics, but for sports as a whole. The Olympics is a fabulous event, but it's only 2 weeks out of every 4 years. What happens the rest of those 4 years, right? And that's why this is important. That is why this matters. That is why these times are crazy. And if we don't understand the business going on behind it, whether that's at the macro level or the micro level, and that includes NIL, by the way, we will just get lost in the process and lost with all these different headlines. So, with all this being said, 3 years ago, this everything changed. But 3 years later, it seems like everything changed again. Where are we now? What is going on? What is NIL looking like in 2024, 3 years later?
It seems like it changes every single day. Uh, you're seeing on the state level rules differing. Some rules allow high school athletes to engage in NIL, some don't allow them to. Some states require you to report all NIL deals, some don't. So, at the bottom line, if your state permits one rule, but the NCAA does not, you are still required to adhere to those NCAA rules. Uh, at the university level, boosters, collectives, donors, they used to not be able to speak with prospective student athletes or PSAs. But after a preliminary injunction by the District of Tennessee, boosters, NIL collectives, and other non institutional parties are now allowed to negotiate potential NIL deals. So it just shows how important collectives are to have a strong collective backing your athletic department and how important it is to have people leading your NIL, whether that's on a team or an athletic department. These deals, of course, can't be pay for play, and you are not allowed to poach or tamper student athletes that aren't in the transfer portal. So a lot has happened, and that's not even all of it. But I think it will only continue to change as the House settlement gets finalized in the coming months. But NIL is it's definitely a huge it's a huge changing force right now.
To understand this and what this all even means, is it an even playing field when it comes to competing in the NCAA? If you look at football, for example, especially when competing not against non-conference teams, what does that look like? Because if there are different laws in different states, I'm sure the competition is completely different. There was a New York Times investigation on the Texas Longhorns at the beginning of the year. There's plenty of investigations going on for Southern college football teams. So much is going on. And I just think, what would happen if a former Pac 12 team would attempt to compete in the SEC or against SEC football teams? That is a completely different ballgame. I think, sure, there was the Power Five, now the Core Four, but even within the Core Four, the SEC is just a league of its own, especially because of this NIL and all the money that goes into it. So, is it even, or what are we seeing here? How does this affect competition?
It's definitely not even, like, that's for sure, and I think that's something that NCAA is working on right now is trying to get uniform state rules across all 50 states, just try and even the playing field. I think with recruiting and stuff like that, that's where your personal brand and NIL of an athletic department and university comes in. Like, just from experience of the women's gymnastics team at Cal, we didn't have the greatest facility. uh, if those are listening that wanna go to Cal though, our facility is getting redone right now, and it's gonna look really good. So, for us, the biggest sell is the Cal Berkeley degree. I think that is the biggest sell for Cal in itself. You get a great degree while competing at the top of your sport. We do our athletic department, like, I don't think people realize how many national championships Cal has won. I don't think people actually know how many, and it's an absurd amount. Like, we have great student athletes, and the student athlete development at Cal is amazing, but you don't know that until you experience it. So right off the bat, when you're in high school, I committed when I was a sophomore in high school. My teammates my year compete committed, so I'm in 8th grade. So they sold Cal to an 8th grader. How do you do that? It's the brand of your university, of your program, and that's what you're selling. Now it's you're selling that plus whatever NIL capital you have. But at the end of the day, for most student athletes, you are still student before athlete.
And I think it's important to also bring up some distinctions in what those big athletic schools look like as well, because obviously you look at Cal and it's an incredible academic institution. It has incredible Olympic teams. I think for the past couple years or so, there were at least three national championships coming in per year,
Yeah.
which is
In
unreal to consider that that's like the standard
Yeah.
held by an athletic department. Now, with that being said, you guys just had an incredible run this past season. You guys finished second in the nation. And if you look at who finished first in the nation and what conference they're in and what their facilities look like, that is an entire different selling point. Obviously, completely different worlds.
Yep.
It's LSU and Cal, and I think that those are schools, both great schools, both great athletic departments, both great gymnastics programs. But I think they're known brand wise for completely different things,
100%.
and that's the point we're trying to make. And I think, yeah, sure, in gymnastics it was 1 and 2, but when you look at other schools, when you consider that there are potentially 200 schools at the Division 1 level, what happens to everybody else? Because there is already a difference between the SEC and what was then the Pac-12, and we're talking about two Power 5, now Core 4 schools. There are 30 plus conferences in the NCAA, and
Division
that
one.
is why this matters.
In Division One, there's 30 however many conferences.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. There's still D2, there's still D3. So it's completely different conversations depending on what level you're at. And I think understanding what levels even exist within the core 4 conferences is extremely important. And I think that is specifically, I mean, I think that is why this podcast really matters. That is why I wanted to start this. That is why I'm coming to you to ask you all of these questions and my curiosity and just to learn more, right? I think you're one of the people in this role that knows the most about this. Sure, there are experts and there are people working on this every single day, but I think your experience is extremely few people have had it, and I think your perspective is so valuable. And I think in these times, as college athletics just begins to become a bigger business, I think student athletes, yes, they're finally starting to get compensated for their success on and off the field, but it's also important for them to understand what that looks like, what that even means, what opportunities exist, what they should and shouldn't be doing. And that's the whole goal that I think we have with this podcast, don't you think?
100%. I think, especially because the entire landscape has changed from recruiting, retention, and just the development of student athletes. For better or for worse, it's debatable, but one thing is for certain, 3 years later since its initial passing, and NIL is still as groundbreaking as it was on July 1st, 2021. And again, everyone has a stake in NIL.
Well, for now, I think that is us introducing our stake in NIL. We are no longer student athletes, but I think this is us playing our part. And I'm just so excited to kick this off. Obviously, off the podcast, you're one of my best friends. It was so fun to hang out the past 4 years, and now we get to start this project together. And I'm just looking forward to learn more about NIL, the specifics within the NCAA, the specifics within NIL history, what NIL examples look like, how maybe, I don't know, maybe in the future we bring on some guests. We talk about what is going on within athletic departments, within media companies, within I already said athletic departments, but for student athletes and their deals, it's so interesting. I think there's so much to talk about. And the best thing about this is that as soon as we think we've touched it all, something new is going to come up. So I'm extremely excited to kick this off. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm so excited to kick this off and looking forward to what's to come. I think that's a great way to end this first episode, don't you think?
100%. I think everyone listening, watching, whatever that may be, stay tuned. This is just the beginning, episode one. Thinking you can find us on Spotify, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn. So we're gonna be everywhere. But yeah, stay tuned, follow along. We're excited to get this started.
Yeah, for sure. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, whether that's on YouTube or Spotify. We will link all of the social medias in the description. It'll probably be Instagram and LinkedIn for sure, potentially TikTok in there as well. But make sure to follow along there. This is really only the beginning. For now, you can expect a weekly episode. Pretty short, kept it at around 30 minutes. So that'll be the goal. And yeah, that's it. Follow,
Yeah.
subscribe, check out the descriptions, check out social media, and we'll see everybody next week.
Bye.